Hello and welcome back to Cipheros. These are all the Python building functions. Now we must understand first a very basic definition of function, not only in Python but in mathematics, in programming in general. Basically, what I want to picture out for you, okay, on a simple definition and understandable, would be that a function works like a magic box. If we set something, in this case an X, this magic box will execute a process and then it will return a Y. So this X changed to a Y. So if we apply something to X, we're going to have Y. Let's say a very basic function. If we have that f of x is equal to x plus 1, it means that no matter what x we set, we're going to add that number by 1. If my x is 2, if I apply this function, 2 plus 1 is 3, and so on and so on. Obviously, functions are not limited to that. We can do basically anything with any number. So my function doesn't have to be x plus 1, but it can be the logarithm of x divided by 2, the integral of x, okay, or the derivative of the summation of x, or the factorial of x. You get that point. In programming, the thing doesn't change that much, but we have more flexibility. I mean, in Python specifically, we have this syntax for defining a function. Notice the ident lines. We simply declare def, the name of the function, it doesn't matter, the args, the number of args. In this case, we have just one. And then we do something with the code, not necessarily with the args, and also optional returning a value. If you want to interpret this return, will be just like throwing the Y, same way as the picture shown. So let's get into all the building Python functions. By the way, building functions are just functions already declared in Python, because as you know, Python is built in C++. So all the code written in Python is translated into C++ to then be executed. All the functions that we are going to see are translated into the already declared functions in C++. So let's get started. The first one is the well-known print, which just prints objects to the text stream, abs, and it stands for absolute value, okay, of a number rather than the method. Okay, we have an example of how this works. Next, we have all, and it takes an iterable. So what does it returns true if all the elements of this iterable are truthy, but false if there is at least one that isn't. On this case, we have the iterable 1 and iterable 2. As we can see, 2, 10 and a string, not entry string, are truthy values. So these are interpreted as true. Yet at the iterable number 2, we have a 0, and 0 is a falsy value. Any number different to 0 is truthy. Similarly with any, it returns true if at least one element is truthy. Getting back to that code, well, we see that, yeah, they accomplish with the truthiness. Next, we have bin. So it converts an integer to binary with this prefix, by the way, just to identify that, yep, the conversion was done. Next, we have this function that takes an object and it returns a string with the special characters that constructed. So this E, as intended, will be interpreted as this. Next, we have bool, that stands for boolean, and it turns into a boolean depending on the argument's truthness. -5 is true as it's a non-zero value, while as explained you before, 0 is a false value, therefore it returns false. Next, breakpoint, and what it does, it just opens the debugger at that line. Where it is placed, following the sequence of the code, well, it will open the debugger. Next, byte array, and it takes as source and encoding as parameters. So it returns a byte array string, mutable sequence of bytes. Normally we can rewrite them or declare them within this b before the string. Similarly, we have bytes, which takes also the same parameters, and it returns a byte string. The only difference is that, yep, on this case, these are objects rather than a specific data type. And as you can notice, the encoding parameter is optional. It means that we can write it or not. Well, it doesn't matter exactly. Next, we have callable. It returns a boolean depending if the object can be used or called. Is this callable? Yep, and it returns true. Now with character, okay, I'm taking x as a parameter, it returns the unique code of an integer x. And if you don't know it, the alphabet, both lowercase and uppercase, are one of the first Unicode characters, and that's why if we set 67, we return an uppercase C. For example, if I would set 66, it would return a uppercase B. And yep, there are a lot of Unicode characters. As you can see, we have this emoji that takes this number. Next, we have compile, and it turns a string into a usable code. Let's say this print Cipheros revolution will be used as normally we write code on Python, okay, on the code editor. Yet the second parameter is the type of which our code will be turned into. Next we have complex that takes the real and imaginary values. So if you don't know what is a complex number, basically it is the definition of an imaginary number and everything just before the I, it's actually called iota, is just a coefficient. In this case, it's not represented in Python as I, but as j, and as you can see, the complex function just declares the real value and the coefficient of the imaginary value. Next, we have get attribute, and what it does is returns the value of a name attribute of an object. Here you have the example. The only attribute that this class has is legs, okay, for a biped animal, and if we initialize on a variable this class and we check for legs, okay, we're going to have what this variable is assigned. In this case, a biped animal will have 2 legs. There is no sports attribute, therefore we can set a default response, by the way, if it's not found. Here you have the example. Something similar works with delete attribute, and it does what its name says. Next we have dict, that stands from dictionary, and the arguments are the key value pairs as args. So what it does is just creates a dictionary. Next, dir, and it returns the value properties. Let's say we have a class for glasses, and for now we don't have the shape defined. We set this command. Therefore, the only value that is valid is color. About deep mode, that takes x and y as parameter, what this does is just returning a tuple containing both the exact division of x and y, that is turned into an integer, and the mode. Here you have some examples. By the way, the modulus will be always positive if you apply the definition of formula for modulus. Enumerate takes an object, basically it does the indexing work, okay? It indexes an object with the key value pairs. Yet if we want to take this result, we must turn the enumerate declaration into a dictionary, because if not, it just returns a process of completion. What does evaluate, which takes a string as parameter, it executes what is inside of the string. In this case, we have this example, which is very similar to compile but simpler. Next we have execute, and it takes a string. Same thing, but doesn't save the value. Filter is one of the most useful functions in real life for Python coding, and what it does is just filters the elements rules given by a function. You can see we have a list of 3 dishes, and we are using a lambda function because of its simplicity to find the foods that have a strawberry on their name. Next, we turn this into a list, because if not, it just will return the message of completion. What does float is converts a number or a string to a float, which is a number with a decimal. Here you have the example. Overall, look up the 1. Well, next with frozen set, which is not that useful actually in real life. What it does is it returns an immutable frozen set object. So we create our set, which is completely immutable. We cannot do the set methods that we are going to see next. Or you have seen on the previous video about all the building methods in Python. Next we have format, which takes a value and format is specified. So it just turns into what we want. Therefore, if this 17 has this x as second parameter, well, it will return as hexadecimal. Same thing with 10, but with O, which is turned into octal. And if we set the number and F, well, it will be rounded into the number of decimals that we've specified. Hash, and it returns the hash value of the object. Okay, do you remember breakpoint? Well, we have a function very similar, which opens up the building help system. So on this line, because I've passed a str or a string as argument, it will show the string documentation depending on the sequence of the code. Continuing, we have id. It takes an object as parameter and it turns the memory view of the object, which can vary. It is almost unique from each computer and case specifically. Here you have some examples. Now, if you remind format, okay, on this case we have a specific function to turn it to hexadecimal. So this is what hex does. Keep in mind the 0 and x. just to identify this number as hexadecimal. Int, it just runs the number to the nearest entity. Also, it turns a string into a number, by the way. Next, the well-known input, okay, and it just takes a prompt. Basically, what it does is that it returns what has been written on the prompt. That's all. It's just a getter on the code. Next, we have len, which is just an abbreviation of length, by the way, and it takes an object as parameter. As you can see, it returns the length of an object. By the way, no, the index is known from 0 on this case. So this hello, which is a string, has 5 elements. Similarly, with this array, it has 3 elements. This case is very different to the way we use indexing, which comes from 0. Next, we have list, takes an iterable and it just creates a list. In this case, we have and a string can be also done into a list. Next, we have map, and what it does, it applies the function on each element of the iterable. So it takes a function and then iterable where the function will be applied. In this case, we have this list, and what we're going to do with it will be just squaring each number, always listing if we want to get this exact result, because if not, it will also log just a completion. Next, we have max and min, which are very similar and just return the max and min value of an iterable respectively. Memory view, and it takes an object. It returns a memory view and notice the B, which stands for byte array. This is more used in computer science and programming in general. Next, we have object, and it just creates a filters object. That is all. It is very useful for things that on the future will be updated. Next, we have octal, and it just turns a decimal base into octal. Here you have the examples. Notice the 0 in prefix. Okay, the X on this case is for any number. That means the octal equivalence. Considering we have open, and it takes a 5 parameter and mode. This reloads means in this case that we have more parameters, okay, but we consider that these are the most important ones and useful for real life. What it does is just opens this file with a selected mode. These are the 3 principal ones. R, that stands for read, W, that stands for write, and A, that stands for append. So the first parameter is the directory of the file, and the second one will be the mode that we open. Next, we have PO. So what it does is basically executing modular exponentiation, which is a mathematical process. Normally, the modulus can be very omitted. Range, and generates a sequence of numbers. The stop value is not included, by the way. So if I set range 4, I will have 1, 2, 3, but not arriving to 4. And by the way, it doesn't count to 0. If we take the start and end parameter, well, we're going to start by the first one, but we will not arrive exactly to the second one. Similarly, if we take that third parameter, which is the step, well, we're just performing the sequence as with parameter, this function that I don't know how to pronounce. And what it does is returning a representation, well, a string representation of the object. We have text, Cipheros. We see only just the difference between the double quotation marks and the single quotation marks, yet because I actually apply this on a string. But for example, if this text will be just a number, then let's say if we pass this variable into rep, we're going to have a normal 10. But if we take the type of it, we're going to see that it's just a string, even if the number doesn't have quotation mark. And it takes a number as parameter. It just returns the number rounded to the end digit. Here you have the example to the first 3 decimals. Set, and it creates a set which are unordered, by the way. So this example is not the only one. I mean, this set could be your own love Cipheros X, but on another case, this could be mom loves your Cipheros. We have these parameters, and it adds the attribute to the object. Here you have some example with the Cipheros class. We can update these attributes with this built-in function. We are almost on the end. We have a slice. Notice how the double dots indicates to which value we are approaching. So if it's before a number, this would be all the elements until that specific index. But if we have rightward to the value, we're going to have all the elements until the end, starting from that value. You have also some examples about how the range works. And let's continue with sort. which takes an iterable and key and reverse. Reverse is a Boolean value, by the way, and it just performs also the reverse built-in function. And it returns a certain list considering the alphanumeric indexing. So we're going to have all order based from the alphabet. Sum, and it returns just like perform summation, okay, from an iterable. It's not that complicated. So all these numbers will be added together. Yep, there's the step parameter. We don't have to specify the parameter because it just takes two parameters. The first one is obviously the iterable. That is basically all. We start from 10, or basically all the elements that were added will be added to 10. We're very almost there. We have type, and it just returns the type of the object. Let's say we have this string, and basically it returns this message, class string. If it's a number, class number. If it's a boolean, class boolean. Similarly, we have a subver, which allows method calls to a parent. Notice how the parent is passed as an argument from the child class. Both have their own methods, but with super, we can use the method for the parent on the child itself. In this case, we are just appending the file that is always being returned from the parent to the message on the child string, and it takes an object. It returns a string version of the object, by the way, which is very similar to rep or representation. There is not that much difference. Next, we have tuple. Intuitively, we may think that it creates a tuple because often use it for update. Almost finishing. We have bars, and it returns the past arguments on the constructor. If we have a class, as you can see that is initialized with name and level. Okay, we're going to have this call with backend and pro, and if we bring this call with the bars function, we're going to have name, backend, and level pro. Iterables also and combines multiple iterables to tuples. So the zero index from the list 1 and 2 will be a new tuple, and so on until they cannot be matched. And it takes name principally. There are several parameters which I represented with these three dots, but principally the most important one is name, and it's another way to input modules and libraries. These two group of two lines are the same thing. Yep, and that is all. Thanks for watching, and we see us on the next one.